The Wells Fargo stagecoach thundered along the dusty trail to Copper Canyon, its wooden wheels churning clouds of amber dust into the late afternoon air. Inside, Clara Beaumont clutched her leather satchel tighter as the coach hit another rut, sending her petite frame bouncing against the hard bench seat. The Boston air seemed a distant memory, now replaced by the dry heat of the Arizona territory that seeped through every crack in the weathered coach. "First time out west, miss." The man across from her, a silver-haired merchant with a pocket watch that he consulted every 15 minutes, smiled kindly. "Is it that obvious?" Clara smoothed her navy traveling dress, now wrinkled and stained with the journey's evidence. "Ain't no one comes to Copper Canyon in clothes like that, less they're fresh from back east." He chuckled, then tilted his head. "Business or family?" Clara hesitated, her fingers instinctively tightening around the satchel containing her uncle's deed and will. "Both, I suppose. My Uncle Albert passed recently. I've inherited his property." The merchant's expression changed slightly, a shadow crossing his weathered face. "Albert Beaumont, the mining fellow." "Yes. Did you know him?" Before he could answer, a sharp crack split the air, a sound Clara had never heard before, but would never forget. The driver's scream followed, then another crack. The stagecoach lurched violently. Clara was thrown forward, her head striking the wooden panel beside her. The silver-haired merchant shouted something, reaching for something inside his coat, but another explosion shattered the window beside him. Glass and blood sprayed across Clara's face. The world tilted. The coach was falling, rolling. Clara's body became weightless, then slammed against wood-metal other passengers. Something heavy crashed against her temple, and darkness swallowed her consciousness. Ethan McGraw pulled his chestnut mare to a halt at the ridge overlooking Copper Creek Trail. At 62, his eyes weren't what they once were, but there was no mistaking the plume of dust rising from the valley below, too much for a lone rider or even a wagon. He adjusted the Springfield Model 1863 rifle strapped across his back, a relic from another life, another war, and nudged his horse forward. The mare resisted, ears flicking nervously. "Easy, Belle," he murmured, patting her neck. "Something's wrong down there." 20 minutes later, Ethan reined in sharply, the acrid smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. The stagecoach lay on its side like a wounded animal, one wheel still spinning lazily. Bodies were strewn around it. The driver slumped over a rock, his chest a ruined mess of crimson, 2 passengers half buried beneath the overturned coach. A third passenger, the silver-haired man, lay face down in the dirt, a pool of darkening blood spreading beneath him. Ethan dismounted, Winchester repeater now in hand, and approached cautiously. 15 years ranching in the Arizona territory had taught him that ambushers sometimes lingered to clean up survivors. The driver was beyond help. The silver-haired passenger, too, a bullet had taken most of his throat. Ethan moved to the overturned coach, checking underneath. A young woman lay crumpled against the far side, her fashionable traveling dress torn and bloody blonde hair matted with dust and crimson. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. For a moment, he saw Sarah, his daughter, dead, 15 years now, in the young woman's features. He shook the thought away and reached carefully into the wreckage. His calloused fingers found a pulse, weak but steady. "Miss," he called softly, then louder, "Miss, can you hear me?" She didn't stir, but she was alive. That was enough. Ethan worked methodically, clearing debris until he could pull her free of the wreckage. A satchel was clutched in her hands, her fingers locked around its handle even in unconsciousness. He laid her gently on a patch of shade and examined her wounds, a nasty gash on her temple, bruises forming across her exposed arms and neck, but no obvious bullet wounds. The mare whinnied nervously, picking up a scent. Ethan tensed, scanning the rocky ridgeline above. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean they were alone. This stretch of road had seen 3 coach robberies in as many months. The gang never left witnesses, except this time they had. Clara surfaced slowly from darkness, her body a constellation of pain. She tried to open her eyes, but only the right responded. The left was swollen shut. A rough wooden ceiling came into focus, then shifted as dizziness washed over her. "Easy now," a gravelly voice said from somewhere to her right. "You've had a bad knock to the head." Clara turned toward the voice. A man sat in a chair beside the bed, tall, even-seated, with broad shoulders now bent slightly with age. His face was deeply lined, tanned by decades in the sun, with a silver-streaked beard and eyes the faded blue of a winter sky. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but striking in his weathered dignity. "Where?" Her voice cracked her throat raw. "My ranch, about 8 miles outside Copper Canyon." He poured water from a pitcher and held it to her lips. "Name's Ethan McGraw. Found you in the wreckage of the Wells Fargo coach." The water was cool, sweet relief. Memory returned in jagged fragments, the stagecoach, the gunshots, the silver-haired man's blood spraying across her face. "The others," she managed. McGraw shook his head, once his expression unchanging, but somehow conveying all she needed to know. Clara closed her eye again, a wave of nausea washing over her. She had been speaking to that kind man just moments before he died. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. Doc Wilson's been by twice. Says you're lucky, bad concussion, some cuts and bruises, but nothing broken." He paused. "Found this clutched in your hands. Figured it must be important." He lifted her leather satchel from beside the chair. Clara tried to sit up too quickly, sending pain lancing through her skull. "My papers are safe," McGraw assured her. "Didn't open it, not my business." Clara sank back against the pillow, relief washing through her. "Thank you, Mr. McGraw. I'm Clara Beaumont." Something flickered in the old rancher's eyes, recognition, perhaps. "Beaumont. Any relation to Albert Beaumont? My uncle. I've come to—" She stopped suddenly, uncertain how much to reveal to this stranger. "Claim his property," McGraw finished for her. "The Blue Ridge Mine and the surrounding acres." Clara nodded cautiously. McGraw's weathered face remained impassive. "Then that stagecoach attack wasn't just bad luck, Miss Beaumont. Someone doesn't want you reaching Copper Canyon." By the 3rd day, Clara was strong enough to sit up in bed while McGraw's housekeeper, an older Mexican woman named Rosalinda, brushed her hair. The rhythmic strokes were soothing, almost maternal. "You have beautiful hair, señorita," Rosalinda said, "like gold in the sunlight." Clara managed a small smile. "Thank you for caring for me." "Señor McGraw gave strict instructions. Said you were to be treated like family." The door opened, and McGraw himself entered, removing his hat. Though he'd been nothing but proper, there was something intimidating about the rancher, perhaps the way he filled a room with his presence or the watchful stillness in his eyes. "Doc Wilson's on his way," he said, "and I've sent word to Sheriff Dillard about the attack, though I wouldn't count on much there." "Why not?" Clara asked. McGraw's expression darkened slightly. "Dillard's more interested in keeping the peace than finding justice. 3 coach robberies in 3 months, and he's done nothing but file reports." Clara studied him more carefully. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, a rancher's practical garb. The Springfield rifle she'd noticed before was mounted on the wall alongside a cavalry saber and a faded daguerreotype of a woman and young girl. "Were you in the war, Mr. McGraw?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Most men my age were, Miss Beaumont." "Yes, Union Army, 27th Pennsylvania. Long time ago now. Before she could ask more, there was a commotion outside, the sound of horses and men's voices. McGraw moved to the window, his posture changing subtly, tension entering his frame. "Stay here," he said, reaching for the Colt revolver at his hip. "Who is it?" Clara asked, fear prickling along her spine. "Don't know yet." He paused at the door. "But if it's who I think it is, you might be meeting the man who wants your land sooner than expected." Dr. Wilson was a stout man with kind eyes and an infectious laugh that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. He examined Clara's head wound with gentle efficiency. "Healing nicely," he pronounced. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Beaumont. Not many survive such attacks." "The others weren't so lucky," Clara said quietly. Wilson's expression sobered. "No, a terrible business. 3 robberies now, all with the same signature. No survivors. Until you." Clara caught the significant glance he exchanged with McGraw, who stood by the window watching the yard. "You believe these robberies are connected to my uncle's land?" she asked directly. Wilson hesitated, but McGraw answered, his eyes still on the yard outside. "Your uncle found something in that mine, Miss Beaumont. Something that got him killed." Clara's breath caught. "The letter said it was a mining accident." "No accident," McGraw said flatly. "I knew Albert. Not well, but enough to know he was too careful for accidents." "Then who—" A horse's neigh interrupted her question. McGraw's hand moved to his holster again. "That'll be Sheriff Dillard," he said. "Finally decided to show up." Wilson packed his medical bag. "I should go. Ethan, don't antagonize him. Miss Beaumont needs peace to recover." McGraw grunted noncommittally, and Wilson took his leave. Moments later, heavy boots sounded on the porch, followed by a sharp knock. Sheriff Tom Dillard was not what Clara had expected. From dime novels, she'd imagined Western lawmen as lean, steely-eyed enforcers of justice. Dillard was heavy-set with a drooping mustache and eyes that never quite met hers directly. "Miss Beaumont," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Glad to see you recovering. Terrible business, that coach robbery." "Yes," Clara said. "Have you caught those responsible—" Dillard shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Well, no, ma'am. Trail's gone cold. Hard country out here, bandits know how to disappear." "3 robberies, Tom," McGraw said from his position by the window. "3 with the same pattern. And you found nothing." Dillard's face reddened slightly. "Now look here, Ethan. We're doing what we can with limited resources. These things happen out here. It's just the risk of frontier life." "The risk increases considerably when you're carrying land deeds to valuable property," McGraw countered. Clara watched the exchange with growing unease. There was history between these men, and not pleasant history. "Miss Beaumont," Dillard said, turning away from McGraw, "once you're well enough, I'll need a formal statement. But my advice, once that's done, head back east. This territory isn't kind to Eastern ladies, especially ones mixed up in complicated business matters." "I have no intention of leaving, Sheriff," Clara said firmly. "My uncle's property is legally mine, and I intend to claim it." At Dillard's expression flickered concern, annoyance. "As you wish, ma'am, but don't say you weren't warned." After he'd gone, Clara turned to McGraw. "He doesn't seem very determined to solve these robberies. Dillard's more politician than lawman." McGraw moved away from the window, his limp more pronounced with fatigue. "Keeps the peace by looking the other way when powerful men bend the law." "And who are these powerful men, Mr. McGraw?" McGraw's weathered face hardened. "In Copper Canyon, that would be Samuel Holloway, mining magnate, ex-Confederate officer, and the man who's been trying to buy your uncle's land for the past year." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. "You think he's behind the attack on the stagecoach? I think," McGraw said carefully, "that you should rest while you can, Miss Beaumont. Tomorrow, if you're strong enough, we ride into town. There's someone you need to meet, someone who might help you understand what you've inherited." He turned to leave, but Clara called after him. "Mr. McGraw, why are you helping me? You don't know me." The old rancher paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. For a moment, his eyes drifted to the daguerreotype on the wall, the woman and child whose faces Clara couldn't quite make out. "I made a promise once," he said quietly, "to never stand by while the strong prey on the weak. Too many good people die because others look away." In that moment, with the fading light catching the silver in his beard, and the ghosts of old battles in his eyes, Ethan McGraw seemed to Clara like something from another time, a knight-errant, perhaps, who had somehow survived into this dusty, violent new world. "Rest now," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Copper Canyon greeted them with the cacophony of a frontier town in the midst of a mining boom. The main street bustled with activity freight wagons loaded with ore rumbling past miners in dust-covered clothes, moving between saloons, merchants hawking wares to newly arrived prospectors. A freshly painted sign announced the arrival of Western Union Telegraph Service, the wires connecting this remote outpost to the wider world. Clara sat straight in the saddle of the gentle mare McGraw had provided, fighting both physical discomfort and the stares of townspeople. Her borrowed riding clothes, a simple blouse and split skirt that had belonged to Rosalinda's daughter, marked her as clearly as her Eastern accent would have. "They're curious about the woman riding with old McGraw," Ethan explained quietly. "Don't get many Eastern ladies out here." They tied their horses outside a small wooden building marked County Recorder and Land Office. Inside, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up from his ledger, surprise registering on his face. "Ethan McGraw," he said, rising, "twice in 1 month. Must be a record." "Frank," McGraw nodded. "This is Miss Clara Beaumont Albert's niece." Frank Weber's eyes widened, darting to Clara with new interest. "Miss Beaumont, we weren't expecting you so soon. I was sorry to hear about the stagecoach incident." "Thank you, Mr. Weber," Clara said. "I've come about my uncle's property. I have his will and deed." She placed her satchel on the desk, removing the carefully preserved documents. Weber examined them, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "Yes, these appear to be in order, but there's a complication." "What complication?" McGraw asked sharply. Weber swallowed. The Blue Ridge mining claim and surrounding property were reassigned 3 weeks ago. "Reassigned?" Clara echoed. "That's impossible. The property is mine by right of inheritance." "According to these documents," Weber said, pulling a different ledger from a shelf, "Albert Beaumont sold the claim to Blue Ridge Mining Company before his death. The sale was registered and witnessed according to territorial law." McGraw's weathered face darkened. "Show me those papers." Weber hesitated before sliding the ledger across. McGraw studied it, his jaw tightening. "This signature isn't Albert's," he said flatly. "I've seen his handwriting. This is forged." Weber paled, glancing nervously toward the door. "That's a serious accusation, Ethan. The paperwork was filed by Mr. Holloway himself with 2 witnesses." "Witnesses who work for Holloway, I'd wager," McGraw countered. Clara looked between the men, her heart racing. "Mr. Weber, my uncle wrote to me before his death. He specifically mentioned leaving his property to me. He had no intention of selling." Weber removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Miss Beaumont, I sympathize with your situation, but legally, the property now belongs to Blue Ridge Mining Company. Without evidence of forgery. We'll get evidence, McGraw interrupted. In the meantime, I suggest you don't file any more transfers on that property. Weber replaced his spectacles, a flicker of resolve showing through his nervous demeanor. I follow the law, Ethan. Always have. The law, McGraw said quietly, or Samuel Holloway. After they left the office, Clara fought to maintain her composure, her hands trembling with anger and shock. He stole my inheritance, she said, her voice low. This Holloway simply took it. McGraw guided her toward a small cafe. Not simple at all. Holloway's been trying to buy that land for months. Albert refused every offer. Why, what's so special about the mine? McGraw glanced around before leaning closer. Let's find somewhere more private to discuss that. The cafe was nearly empty, a small mercy. Over coffee that was surprisingly good for a frontier establishment, McGraw's voice dropped to a near whisper. Frank Weber slipped me something when we shook hands, he said, sliding a folded note across the table. Seems he's not entirely Holloway's man after all. Clara unfolded the note carefully. In a neat hand, it read, Blue Ridge Assay Reports Falsified. Real value 10x official record. Meet behind Peterson's livery at 2 p.m. if you want proof. She looked up, eyes wide. 10 times. But that would mean that your uncle found something valuable, something worth killing for. McGraw's weathered face was grim. Gold, most likely. A rich vein that he kept quiet about. Is that why he was killed? McGraw nodded slowly. Albert was careful. Too careful to die in a mining accident. And now, 3 weeks after his death, you're attacked on your way to claim his property. He sipped his coffee. That's not coincidence, Miss Beaumont. Clara stared into her cup, thoughts racing. What do we do now? First we meet Weber's contact. Then we find you a lawyer, someone not afraid of Holloway. McGraw checked his pocket watch. But, before that, I believe we're about to meet the man himself. Clara followed his gaze to the cafe window. A polished black carriage had stopped outside, drawn by 4 matching gray horses. A tall man in an expensive suit descended, flanked by 2 rough-looking men with revolvers visible at their hips. Samuel Holloway, McGraw said quietly, right on time. Samuel Holloway cut an imposing figure as he entered the cafe, tall, broad-shouldered, despite his 45 years, with a neatly trimmed beard shot through with distinguished silver. His suit was clearly Eastern-made, his boots polished to a mirror shine. The 2 men flanking him remained by the door as he approached their table. A practiced smile beneath calculating eyes. Ethan McGray, he said, his deep voice carrying the lingering traces of a Southern accent. Still consorting with the lower elements of society, I see. McGraw didn't rise. Holloway. Holloway turned his attention to Clara, his smile warming without reaching his eyes. And this must be Miss Beaumont. News travels fast in small towns. He extended a hand. Samuel Holloway, owner of Blue Ridge Mining Company. My sincere condolences for your uncle. Clara didn't take the offered hand. My uncle's property was stolen, Mr. Holloway, through forged documents. If Holloway was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. He pulled out a chair, uninvited, and sat adjusting his expensive coat. A serious accusation, Miss Beaumont. I purchased that property legally with all paperwork in order. He smiled again, showing perfect teeth. I understand your disappointment. Family often assumes inheritance only to discover debts or prior arrangements. There were no prior arrangements, Clara said firmly. My uncle wrote to me specifically about his intentions. Letters can be outdated. people change their minds." Holloway's tone remained pleasant, reasonable. "Regardless, I'm prepared to offer you compensation, say $500, a gesture of goodwill, though I'm under no obligation." Clara's temper flared. "The property is worth far more than that." A flicker of something annoyance concern crossed Holloway's face before his smile returned. "The official essay reports suggest otherwise, Miss Beaumont. But I'm a fair man. Let's say 1,000. That would fund your return journey to Boston in considerable comfort." McGraw watched the exchange silently, his weathered hand resting near his holstered Colt. "I'm not returning to Boston," Clara said. "I'm staying to claim what's rightfully mine." Holloway's smile faded slightly. "The frontier is no place for an Eastern lady alone, Miss Beaumont. Accidents happen with alarming frequency. Stagecoach robberies, mining mishaps. It would be a shame to see Albert's tragedy repeated." The threat, though veiled, hung in the air between them. McGraw's voice cut through the tension. "She's not alone, Holloway." Holloway turned his cold gaze to the rancher. "No, and what exactly are you in this arrangement?" "McGraw, protector partner." His eyes moved between them with insinuation. "Something more intimate, perhaps?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but McGraw didn't flinch. "I'm the man who's going to make sure justice is done," he said quietly. "Something this town hasn't seen much of lately." Holloway chuckled, rising from his chair. "Justice from a man with your history, that's Rich McGraw." He adjusted his cuffs. "Miss Beaumont, my offer stands for 24 hours. After that, well, frontier life is unpredictable. Good day." With a slight nod, he departed, his men falling in behind him. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He just threatened me, in broad daylight." "That's Holloway," McGraw said grimly. "Polite manners covering a killer's heart. Confederate officer during the war, rumored to have executed prisoners. Came west afterward like many who couldn't adjust to peace." "You have history with him," Clara observed. McGraw's expression hardened. "We've had disagreements about how business should be conducted in Copper Canyon." Something in his tone suggested there was much more to the story, but Clara didn't press. Instead, she watched through the window as Holloway's carriage pulled away. "He's afraid," she said suddenly. "He offered money too quickly. If the mine were worthless, he'd let me have it or tie it up in legal proceedings." McGraw nodded approvingly. "You have good instincts, Miss Beaumont. Yes, he's afraid of what your uncle found, and afraid you'll discover it too." Clara turned back to him, resolve hardening within her. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." Peterson's livery smelled of hay and horses, the late afternoon sun slanting through gaps in the wooden walls. Clara and McGraw waited behind the building, the minutes ticking by, with no sign of Weber's contact. "Maybe they're not coming," Clara whispered, scanning the alley. McGraw shook his head. "They'll come, probably making sure they weren't followed." As if on cue, a figure appeared at the far end of the alley, a young black man in a well-worn suit, carrying a leather portfolio, and walking with the careful precision of someone trying not to attract attention. He approached them directly, his intelligent eyes assessing them quickly. "Miss Beaumont, Mr. McGraw." His voice was educated with the accent of Philadelphia or Baltimore. "Joshua Freeman. Frank Weber said you needed legal assistance." McGraw studied him. "You're a lawyer." "Harvard Law class of '72, Freeman replied without defensiveness. "One of 8 colored graduates that year. I practice mining law, primarily." "In Copper Canyon?" Clara asked, surprised to find such credentials in this remote outpost. A tight smile. "The frontier offers opportunities unavailable elsewhere, Miss Beaumont, even to men like me." He glanced around. "But we shouldn't talk here. My office is 3 blocks down." Freeman's office was a small room above the town's print shop, sparsely furnished, but meticulously organized. He locked the door behind them and pulled the shades before opening his portfolio. "Frank Weber risks his position sharing these," he explained, spreading several documents on his desk. "These are the original assay reports for Blue Ridge Mine conducted 6 months ago. Your uncle commissioned them privately from an assayer in Tucson." Clara examined the technical document. "I don't understand the terminology." "It shows a rich gold vein running through what was ostensibly a copper mine," Freeman explained. "Worth roughly $50,000 at current prices, possibly much more with proper equipment." McGraw whistled softly. "No wonder Holloway wanted it." "Indeed. According to Weber, your uncle discovered the vein but kept it quiet, extracting copper normally while secretly assessing the gold potential." Freeman handed her another document. "This is the assay report Holloway filed with the county showing only trace amounts of gold, not enough to justify serious investment." "He falsified records to keep the price down," Clara realized. "Standard practice for men like Holloway," Freeman said grimly. "What isn't standard is murder." Clara's head snapped up. "You believe my uncle was murdered?" "I know he was." Freeman unlocked a drawer and withdrew a tattered journal. "This belonged to a miner named Joaquin Vasquez, one of your uncle's employees. He witnessed 2 of Holloway's men tampering with support beams the day before the accident. Vasquez was preparing to tell the sheriff when he was found with his throat cut. Saloon brawl, according to the official report." McGraw's expression darkened. "Dillard covered it up." "Dillard looks the other way when Holloway is involved," Freeman confirmed. "Which brings us to your situation, Miss Beaumont. The forged sale documents would be challenging to disprove in a territorial court, especially with Holloway's influence. However," he smiled slightly, "your uncle anticipated trouble." He handed Clara a sealed envelope. "Albert left this with me 2 days before his death, with instructions to give it to his niece if anything happened to him." Clara broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in her uncle's familiar handwriting, along with a second deed to the property filed not in Arizona territory, but with the federal land office in San Francisco. "A duplicate claim," Freeman explained, "perfectly legal under federal statutes. Holloway's territorial claim won't stand against federal registration." Clara read her uncle's letter, tears welling in her eyes. "My dear Clara, if you're reading this, I've met with foul play. The Blue Ridge property is more valuable than anyone suspects, and Samuel Holloway will stop at nothing to possess it. Trust no one in Copper Canyon except Joshua Freeman and perhaps old Ethan McGraw, a prickly soul but honest to his core. The federal deed enclosed will secure your rightful ownership, but be careful. Holloway has killed before and will kill again. With love and regret for bringing this danger to your door, Uncle Albert." Clara looked up, wiping her eyes. "This proves my claim, then." "It gives us solid legal footing," Freeman cautioned, "but law moves slowly in the territories. Holloway won't wait for court decisions. He'll act directly once he knows about the federal deed." "Then we need to force his hand," McGraw said. "Make a public claim that can't be ignored." Freeman nodded. "I've already wired a colleague at the federal courthouse in San Francisco. He'll expedite authentication of the deed. In the meantime—" He stopped abruptly, head tilting toward the window. "Someone's watching," he whispered slowly, moving to the side of the shade. McGraw's hand moved to his holster. "How many?" "2 men across the street. They followed us from the livery." Clara felt her heart racing. Holloway's men. Most likely, Freeman said. "We should separate. They're less likely to act against a group in broad daylight." McGraw nodded. "I'll take Miss Beaumont back to the ranch. Safer there than in town." "And I'll prepare the legal filings," Freeman agreed. "We'll meet again in 2 days." As they prepared to leave, Clara turned to the young lawyer. "Why are you helping us? Mr. Freeman Holloway seems dangerous to cross." Freeman's expression hardened. "My father was a free man of color who owned a small gold claim in California. Men like Holloway took it from him through forged papers and threats. When he protested, they hanged him as a claim jumper on his own land." His eyes met hers steadily. "Justice may come slowly in the West, Miss Beaumont, but it does come." The ride back to McGraw's ranch was tense, both of them constantly scanning the trail for signs of pursuit. The sun was setting, painting the desert in fiery hues of orange and crimson. "We're being followed," McGraw said quietly as they crested a rise. 2 riders keeping their distance. Clara fought rising panic. "What do we do?" "Keep riding normally. There's a fork in the trail ahead. When we reach it, we'll split up. You take the mare and follow the creek bed to the ranch. I'll deal with our shadows." "Split up, but the mare knows the way." McGraw cut her off. "And you'll be harder to track in the creek bed." Clara wanted to protest, but recognized the steel in his voice. This was the soldier speaking now, not the rancher. At the fork, McGraw nodded once. "Ride hard, don't look back. Rosalinda will be watching for you." Before Clara could respond, he wheeled his horse and charged up the rocky slope to their right, drawing his rifle in one fluid motion. Clara dug her heels into the mare's flanks, ducking low as the horse plunged down the creek bed. Behind her, a gunshot echoed across the hills. Then another. The mare seemed to understand the urgency, picking her way through the rocky stream with surprising speed. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Her thoughts, a jumble of fear. Fear for herself, fear for McGraw, fear of the violence that seemed to surround her uncle's legacy. Night was falling quickly, the desert cooling with remarkable speed. The mare, navigated by instinct, now following a path invisible to Clara's untrained eyes. Another shot rang out in the distance, followed by silence. After what seemed an eternity, the lights of McGraw's ranch appeared around a bend. Rosalinda stood on the porch, rifle in hand, her weathered face tight with worry. "Señorita," she called, "quickly!" Clara dismounted her legs, nearly buckling beneath her. "Mr. McGraw, he's still out there. There were men following us." "Inside," Rosalinda urged, helping her up the steps. "Joaquin and Miguel are already riding out to help him." Inside the ranch house, Clara paced anxiously, unable to settle, despite her exhaustion and pain. An hour passed, then another. Finally, hoofbeats approached, and she rushed to the window. Ethan McGraw dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg more than usual. His face was smudged with dirt, and what might have been blood, his expression grim as he spoke quietly to the 2 Mexican ranch hands who had accompanied him back. When he entered the house, Clara rushed to him. "You're hurt." "Just a graze," he dismissed, though his sleeve was torn and blood-stained. "Those boys weren't hired for their shooting skills. Holloway's men, one of them. The other was new professional gunman by the look of him." McGraw sank into a chair, allowing Rosalinda to examine his arm. "Holloway's escalating, hiring real talent now." "Did you? Are they?" Clara couldn't bring herself to finish the question. McGraw understood anyway. "No, one's nursing a bullet in his shoulder, but they both rode away. I was just sending a message." Rosalinda clucked disapprovingly as she cleaned the wound. "One day your messages will get you killed, viejo." "We all die someday, Rosa," he replied tiredly. "Question is, what we stood for while we lived." The old woman muttered something in Spanish that made McGraw chuckle, despite his pain. Clara watched the exchange, seeing a side of the stern rancher she hadn't glimpsed before a flicker of warmth beneath the weathered exterior. "What happens now?" she asked when Rosalinda had finished bandaging his arm. McGraw's expression turned serious again. "Now we prepare. Holloway won't stop with hired guns. When that fails, he'll try something bigger. The deed won't matter if you're dead," McGraw said bluntly. "Legal paper only matters to men who respect the law. Holloway uses law when it suits him and ignores it when it doesn't." Clara sank into a chair opposite him, the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I never imagined it would be like this." Uncle Albert's letters made it sound like an adventure coming west, managing a mine. He never mentioned this. "He wouldn't have wanted to frighten you," McGraw said, his voice softening slightly. "Albert was a good man, idealistic, believed in progress and opportunity. You knew him well." "Well enough. He helped me once, years back, when my well ran dry during a drought. Didn't ask for payment, just said to pass on the kindness." McGraw's gaze drifted to the daguerreotype on the wall. "That was after I lost my family. Not many showed kindness to a broken-down old soldier back then." Clara followed his gaze to the faded image. "Your wife and daughter," McGraw nodded once. "Sarah and little Beth. Smallpox, 15 years ago." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara caught the shadow that passed over his features. "Beth would be about your age now." The parallel hung unspoken between them, why a solitary rancher might risk his life for a young woman he barely knew. Before Clara could respond, a sound outside made McGraw tense. He rose smoothly, Colt appearing in his hand, and moved to the window. "Get down," he said sharply. Clara slid from her chair to the floor as McGraw extinguished the lamp. In the sudden darkness, she heard it too, horses approaching, multiple riders moving slowly, deliberately. "Back door," McGraw whispered. "Rosalinda will take you to the root cellar." "What about you?" In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she saw his profile harden. "I'm done running from Holloway's kind," he said quietly. "Time they learned that not everyone in this territory can be bought or frightened." The approaching riders halted. A voice called from the darkness, cultured with that lingering southern drawl. "McGraw, send out the Beaumont woman, and we'll leave your ranch standing." Samuel Holloway had come to collect his property personally. "McGraw, last chance, send out the Beaumont woman." Holloway's voice carried through the night air, edged with the confidence of a man unaccustomed to being refused. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ranch yard, illuminating at least 6 mounted men surrounding the house. "Go with Rosalinda," McGraw whispered to Clara. "Root cellar has a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. Follow it until you reach the old cottonwood. My foreman Miguel will find you there." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Clara protested. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when they killed my uncle," she countered, surprising herself with her own resolve. McGraw studied her in the dim light, then gave a single nod. "Then stay low and do exactly as I see." He moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a second revolver, which he handed to her. "You know how to use this." "No," Clara admitted, the weight of the Colt Navy unfamiliar in her hand. "Simple enough. Point and pull the trigger. 6 shots, then you're empty." His expression softened slightly. "But with luck, you won't need it." Outside, horses shifted restlessly. "McGraw," Holloway called again, impatience creeping into his tone. "Don't make this worse than it needs to be." McGraw crossed to the front door, positioning himself to the side of the frame. "Rosalinda," he called softly. "Get the boys ready." The old woman nodded, slipping through the back of the house. McGraw raised his voice. "That's far enough, Holloway. This is private property." "We've come for the Beaumont woman, nothing more," Holloway replied. "She's interfering with legitimate business." "Legitimate?" McGraw scoffed. "Like Albert Beaumont's accident, or the forged sale documents." A pause. Then, "You're making dangerous accusations, old man. I've been patient out of respect for your age, to in the service, but my patience has limits." "So does mine," McGraw answered. He turned to Clara and whispered, "When it starts, stay down." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "When what starts?" Instead of answering, McGraw called out, "I'm giving you one chance, Holloway. Take your men and leave." Hollow laughter floated through the darkness. "You and what army, McGraw?" As if in answer, flares suddenly ignited at the corners of the property, bathing the yard in harsh light. From the barn, the bunkhouse and the corral rifle barrels glinted McGraw's ranch hands positioned for a crossfire. "That army," McGraw said quietly. Clara could see Holloway clearly now in the flare light, his expensive coat dusty from the ride, his face a mask of cold fury as he realized the trap. Beside him sat the gunman who'd been watching Freeman's office earlier, and 4 other hard-faced men with rifles across their saddles. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Holloway's expression shifted to one of calculated amusement. "Impressive staging, McGraw. But are your vaqueros really prepared to die for an Eastern woman they've never met? For a land dispute that doesn't concern them? Why don't we find out?" came a new voice. A rider emerged from the shadows beyond the flares, a tall figure on a dappled gray horse. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the distinctive wide-brimmed cavalry hat and the silver star pinned to his vest. "Evening, Holloway," the rider said casually. "Bit late for a social call, isn't it?" Holloway's jaw tightened. "Dillard, this doesn't concern you. 6 armed men surrounding a homestead after dark." Sheriff Dillard guided his horse into the yard. "I'd say that concerns me directly." Clara looked at McGraw in confusion. Hadn't he said Dillard was in Holloway's pocket? McGraw seemed equally surprised but recovered quickly. "Sheriff, glad you could join us." Dillard nodded slightly. "Got word there might be trouble out here tonight. Seems the information was accurate." Holloway's expression had turned calculating. "We were just leaving, Sheriff. A simple misunderstanding about property boundaries." "With 6 armed men," Dillard raised an eyebrow. "Must be some misunderstanding." "As I said, we're leaving." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. He turned his horse, but before riding away, fixed his gaze on Clara, who had moved to stand behind McGray in the doorway. "This isn't over, Miss Beaumont. Not by a long shot." The 6 riders departed, hoofbeats fading into the night. Only when they were well away did McGraw lower his rifle, signaling his men to do the same. Dillard dismounted, approaching the porch. "Thought you could use some assistance, Ethan." Bacchus studied the sheriff with undisguised suspicion. "Didn't expect to see you riding against Holloway." Dillard removed his hat, revealing thinning hair plastered with sweat. "I serve the law, not Samuel Holloway." He didn't sound entirely convincing, even to Clara's untrained ear. "Since when?" McGraw challenged. Dillard's expression hardened. "Since I got tired of finding bodies every time that man sets his sights on something. 3 stagecoach robberies, Albert Beaumont, that Mexican miner who fell down a shaft. It's getting too obvious to ignore." "Yet you've ignored it until now. Politics is complicated out here, Ethan. You know that." Dillard turned to Clara. "Miss Beaumont, I owe you an apology. I should have taken your case more seriously from the start." Clara wasn't sure she trusted this sudden change of heart. "What changed your mind, Sheriff?" Dillard hesitated, then reached into his vest, withdrawing a folded telegram. "This arrived from San Francisco this afternoon. Federal Land Office confirms your deed is authentic and supersedes any territorial claim." He handed it to her. "Copper Canyon may be rough, ma'am, but we do respect federal law." McGraw took the telegram, examining it carefully. "Convenient timing, Tom." "Isn't it?" Dillard agreed with a wry smile. "Almost like someone in Freeman's office has a direct wire to Washington." He replaced his hat. "Holloway won't give up easily. He's not used to losing." "Then why turn against him now?" Clara asked. "Let's just say I'm betting on a different horse." Dillard mounted up. "I'll have deputies patrol the road tonight, but I'd suggest you both stay alert. Holloway's a sore loser." After Dillard rode away, McGraw closed the door, his expression troubled. "Do you trust him?" Clara asked. "About as far as I could throw him," McGraw replied. "Dillard always plays both sides, waiting to see which way the wind blows." "That telegram changed something." Clara examined the paper. "It says the Secretary of the Interior himself confirmed my claim." "That would do it." McGraw nodded. "Dillard's no fool. If Washington's involved, he'll want to be on the right side of history." He checked his pocket watch. "It's late. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we find out what's really in that mine of yours." Dawn was breaking as they rode out McGraw, leading a small party consisting of Clara Miguel and 2 other trusted ranch hands. The morning air was crisp, the vast Arizona sky painted in watercolor hues of pink and gold. Clara rode with more confidence today, her body adjusting to the saddle despite the lingering soreness from her injuries. The borrowed men's clothing, practical canvas trousers, cotton shirt, and leather vest, allowed her to ride astride properly, though she knew her Boston acquaintances would have been scandalized. "Your uncle's property starts just beyond that ridge," McGraw explained, pointing ahead. 500 acres, including the mine, a small cabin, and good water access from Blue Creek. "Have you been there before?" Clara asked. "Once or twice. Albert invited me to see the operation about a year ago. Seemed excited about something, though he didn't say what." McGraw's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes scanned the horizon, constantly alert for trouble. As they crested the ridge, Clara got her first view of her inheritance. Below, a valley stretched toward distant mountains, dotted with piñon pines and yucca. A small wooden structure stood near a creek, and beyond it, the dark mouth of a mine tunnel was visible in the hillside, with ore carts and processing equipment scattered nearby. "Blue Ridge," Magra announced. "Not much to look at, but what matters is underneath." They descended carefully, the horses picking their way down the rocky slope. As they approached the cabin, McGraw raised a hand, signaling a halt. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. "The door's open." Clara noticed it, then the cabin door swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Miguel and the other hands spread out, rifles ready. McGraw dismounted, drawing his Colt. "Stay here," he told Clara, "but stay here." His tone brooked no argument. Clara watched anxiously as McGraw approached the cabin, moving with the silent precision of a man who had seen combat. He flattened himself against the wall beside the door, then in one swift motion swung around the frame, weapon raised. A tense moment passed. Then, clear. Clara dismounted, hurrying to join him. The cabin's interior was simple: one room with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves holding books, mining equipment, and personal effects. But it had been thoroughly ransacked, drawers emptied onto the floor, mattress slashed, open floorboards pried up. "Someone was looking for something," McGraw observed grimly. Clara moved to a small desk where papers were scattered. Uncle Albert's journals, she said, gathering several leather-bound books, and his correspondence. She leafed through the pages, finding technical notations, geological observations, and personal reflections. These might tell us what he found. McGraw examined the pried-up floorboards. Whatever they were looking for, I'm guessing they didn't find it. This place was torn apart methodically. He knelt, running his fingers along the exposed joists. Wait, there's something here. From a hidden recess beneath the floorboards, he extracted a small metal box. It was locked, but the key hung on a leather cord around Clara's neck, sent to her with her uncle's last letter. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. Inside lay a leather pouch, a folded map, and another letter addressed to her. She opened the pouch first, gasping as several gold nuggets tumbled into her palm, each the size of a small pebble, glinting richly in the morning light. "That's not trace gold," McGraw said softly. "That's a mother lode." Clara unfolded the map, a detailed rendering of the mine tunnels with one section circled in red ink. She then opened the letter, "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, you've made it to Blue Ridge despite the dangers." The enclosed map shows the location of what I believe to be the richest gold vein discovered in the territory. A vein that runs through federal land I've legally claimed, but also extends beneath property controlled by Samuel Holloway. This is why he wants Blue Ridge so desperately. His geologists have found traces, but only I know the vein's true course. With your Eastern education and keen mind, you'll understand what must be done better than I could. Be careful who you trust. Holloway has spies everywhere. With love and faith in you, Uncle Albert. Clara looked up, her mind racing. The gold vein crosses boundaries under Holloway's land. McGraw nodded grimly. Mining law states the discoverer owns the vein regardless of surface boundaries. If Albert documented this properly, Holloway loses everything, Clara finished. No wonder he was willing to kill. They were interrupted by Miguel's urgent call from outside. "Riders coming, at least 10. McGraw moved swiftly to the door, rifle in hand. Through the cabin's single window, Clara could see a dust cloud rising from the direction of Copper Canyon. "Get that box and anything else important," McGraw ordered. "We need to move, now." Clara quickly gathered the journal's map and gold samples, securing them in her saddlebags. As she stepped outside, squinting against the morning sun, her heart sank. The approaching riders weren't Holloway's men. They were Apache warriors, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable, even at a distance, feathers and weapons catching the sunlight as they rode hard toward the cabin. "Back inside," McGraw said tensely. "Miguel, get the horses behind the cabin. Jacob, rifle position at the north window." Clara retreated into the cabin, fear gripping her chest. "I thought the Apache were on reservations now." "Some are," McGraw replied, checking his ammunition. "Others refuse to surrender their ancestral lands. This region belonged to Red Hawk's band for generations before miners arrived." Red Hawk, war chief, fought against the cavalry for years before agreeing to a fragile peace. McGraw's expression was grim, but not panicked. "They're not raiding too few warriors broad daylight. This is something else." The Apache riders halted about 100 yards from the cabin, one figure slightly ahead of the others. Even from this distance, Clara could see he was older than his companions, his face deeply lined, his black hair streaked with gray. He wore no war paint, but the feathers in his hair and the medals hanging from his buckskin shirt marked him as a leader. "Red Hawk," McGraw confirmed, lowering his rifle slightly. "And he's not here to fight, or we'd already be under attack." To Clara's shock, McGraw stepped outside, handing his rifle to Miguel. He walked forward several paces, then stopped in the open ground before the cabin. Red Hawk nudged his pony forward until he was 30 yards from McGraw. For a long moment, the two men, one white, one Apache, both weathered by decades of frontier hardship, regarded each other in silence. Then McGraw raised his right-hand palm forward and spoke several words in a language Clara didn't recognize. Red Hawk responded in the same tongue, his deep voice carrying across the distance. "You speak their language," Clara whispered to Miguel, who had moved beside her in the doorway. The foreman nodded. Senor McGraw fought alongside Apache scouts during the war. Learned their ways, earned their respect. The conversation continued for several minutes, McGraw and Red Hawk exchanging words in that flowing guttural language. Finally, McGraw beckoned to Clara. "He wants to speak with the woman who claims Blue Ridge," McGraw explained as she hesitantly joined him. "I've vouched for your character, but the final judgment is his." Clara swallowed hard, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel as Red Hawk's obsidian eyes studied her. The Apache chief was intimidating, not just in his physical presence, but in the weight of history and suffering etched into his weathered features. "Tell him I respect that his people lived here long before mine," Clara said, meeting the chief's gaze directly. "And that I'm sorry for the wrongs done to them." McGraw translated. Red Hawk listened impassively, then responded at length. "He says words are easy," McGraw translated. "White people always have good words and bad actions. His people have suffered many broken promises." Clara nodded. "I understand his distrust. Ask him what I can do to prove my sincerity." More exchange followed. Red Hawk gesturing occasionally toward the mountains, his warriors sitting motionless behind him. "The situation is complicated," McGraw explained after a particularly long discourse from the chief. "Blue Ridge sits at the edge of what the Apache consider sacred land, a burial ground on the mountain beyond. The creek that runs through your property feeds their settlements downstream. They've had conflict with miners who poisoned the water with mercury and other chemicals." "My uncle would never have done that," Clara said firmly. Red Hawk agrees. He says Albert Beaumont respected the water and the land, kept his promises. McGraw's expression turned grave. "But Holloway is different. His operations have killed the creek north of here, and his men have desecrated burial sites. The Apache will not allow this to happen at Blue Ridge." Clara considered this information carefully. "Tell Red Hawk that I will continue my uncle's practices. The water will remain clean and the sacred sites untouched." McGraw translated. Red Hawk responded with a question. "He asks what you will do when Holloway offers to buy the mine for more gold than you've ever seen." Clara didn't hesitate. "Tell him some things aren't for sale. The land, the water these belong to, all who depend on them, not just those who can pay the highest price." When McGraw translated this, something shifted in Red Hawk's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening of his stern countenance. He spoke again more rapidly. "He says Holloway came to them 3 days ago." McGraw translated surprise evident in his voice. "Offered rifles and whiskey if they would attack Blue Ridge and drive away anyone who tried to work the mine. Said they could blame it on renegade Apache from the San Carlos Reservation." Clara gasped. "He tried to orchestrate an Indian attack to scare me away." McGraw nodded grimly. "It's an old tactic. Create fear, then offer protection for a price." "Why didn't they accept his offer?" McGraw posed the question. Red Hawk's answer was brief but forceful. "He says they are warriors, not hired killers, and that Holloway has already spilled too much Apache blood to ever be trusted." Red Hawk spoke again, gesturing toward the mountains. "He says there is more you should know," McGraw translated. Something about the land that neither Holloway nor your uncle fully understood. He offers to show us if we will follow. Clara hesitated only briefly. Tell him we would be honored. They rode single file along a narrow game trail, climbing steadily into the foothills beyond Blue Ridge. Red Hawk led, followed by Clara and McGraw, with two Apache warriors, and Miguel bringing up the rear. The other Apache had disappeared into the landscape as silently as they had appeared, presumably watching from hidden positions. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, piñon pines giving way to scrub brush that clung tenaciously to rocky soil. Twice they crossed the creek that ran through Clara's property, its clear water bubbling over ancient stones. "Where is he taking us?" Clara asked quietly. "To the source of the creek, I believe," McGraw replied. "Sacred ground to the Apache." After nearly an hour's ride, they rounded a bend to find a small box canyon nestled between towering sandstone walls. Red Hawk dismounted, gesturing for them to do the same. "Leave the horses," McGraw instructed. "This is holy ground to them." They followed Red Hawk on foot to the canyon's inner recess, where the creek emerged from a rock face, forming a small, crystal-clear pool. Beside the pool stood several stone cairns, clearly man-made and very old. Red Hawk spoke softly, reverently. "Ancestor spirits dwell here," McGraw translated. "The water carries their wisdom down to the people. For 1,000 years before white men came, Apache have brought their dead to rest in these walls." He gestured to barely visible openings high in the canyon walls, small caves that Clara now realized were burial sites. Red Hawk continued pointing to the rock face where the water emerged. "The yellow metal you seek," McGraw translated, "comes from the sacred mountain. The ancestors placed it there to test the hearts of men. Those who take it with respect, leaving the water clean and the land unharmed, may prosper. Those who poison the earth for it will find only death." Clara listened, fascinated by this perspective so different from the profit-driven approach of Eastern mining interests. Red Hawk knelt by the pool, dipping his hand into the water, then continued speaking while looking directly at Clara. "He says your uncle understood this balance," McGraw translated. "He took what he needed, but kept the water pure. Holloway does not understand, or does not care. His methods would destroy this place." "The cyanide leaching process," Clara murmured, recalling discussions of new mining techniques from her uncle's letters. "It extracts more gold, but poisons everything downstream." Red Hawk nodded, as if understanding her words directly. He rose, retrieving something from a pouch at his waist, a small carved stone figure of a bear, polished by generations of handling. "A gift," McGraw translated as Red Hawk pressed it into Clara's palm. "The bear protects those who protect the land. He says you have a good heart, like your uncle, but difficult choices lie ahead." Red Hawk spoke once more, his voice solemn. "He warns that Holloway will not stop." McGraw said, "The yellow metal sickness has consumed him. Red Hawk's people will neither help nor hinder you. This is not their fight, but they will watch to see if you keep your word about the water and the sacred places." Clara closed her fingers around the stone bear, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. "Tell him I will honor my promises whatever comes." Red Hawk nodded once, then turned to McGraw, speaking rapidly. McGraw's expression darkened as he listened. "What is it?" Clara asked when they finished. "Trouble," McGraw said grimly. "Red Hawk's scouts report a large party of armed men gathering at Holloway's main camp. At least 20 hired guns, including some he recognizes as former cavalry scouts who hunted Apache during the wars. They're preparing to attack Blue Ridge," Clara realized. "Not just Blue Ridge," McGraw corrected. "Red Hawk says they're bringing wagons of equipment, drilling gear, explosives." Holloway's not planning to drive us off. He's going to try to strip mine the entire area before federal marshals can arrive to enforce your claim." The Copper Canyon Courthouse stood at the end of Main Street, its whitewashed, clapboard exterior and modest bell tower projecting an air of frontier dignity. Built just 3 years earlier, it represented the territory's gradual shift from mining camp lawlessness to organized governance. Today, its single courtroom was packed to capacity, townspeople crammed shoulder to shoulder on rough-hewn benches. Clara sat beside Freeman at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to conceal their trembling. She wore her only remaining dress, a navy traveling outfit now cleaned and pressed by Rosalinda's careful hands. Though it marked her as an outsider among the calico and homespun of the local women, Freeman had insisted on proper Eastern attire. "Appearances matter," he'd explained. "We need to remind Judge Griffin that you represent civilization and progress." McGraw sat directly behind her, freshly shaved, but still imposing in his best shirt and weathered leather vest. His Springfield rifle had been checked at the door, but Clara knew the Colt remained hidden beneath his coat. The events at Blue Ridge had left them all wary. On the defense table across the aisle, Samuel Holloway projected easy confidence in an immaculate black suit that must have cost more than most miners earned in a year. Beside him sat his lawyer, Harlan Wheeler, a jowly man with cold eyes, who had arrived on yesterday's stage from Prescott, rumored to be on retainer to several large mining interests. The back of the courtroom was filled with a mixture of curious townspeople, miners, and several of Holloway's men. Their weapons likewise checked at the door, but their hostile presence unmistakable. Sheriff Dillard stood near the entrance, flanked by 2 deputies, his expression unreadable. Judge Walter Griffin entered from his chambers, a tall, austere man with iron-gray hair, and a reputation for scrupulous adherence to the letter of the law. The bailiff called for all to rise, and the proceedings began. Freeman presented their case first, methodically laying out the evidence: Clara's legitimate inheritance, the federal deed filing, and the forged documents submitted by Holloway. He called Frank Weber from the land office, who reluctantly testified that the signature on Holloway's deed didn't match Albert Beaumont's other documents. Throughout this testimony, Holloway remained impassive, occasionally leaning to whisper to Wheeler, his face betraying nothing but mild interest. Only when Freeman submitted the telegram from the Department of the Interior did a muscle tighten in his jaw. "Your Honors," Freeman concluded, "federal law is clear. Miss Beaumont's claim predates and supersedes any territorial filing. The Blue Ridge property is legally hers, and Mr. Holloway's operation constitutes trespassing and attempted theft of mineral resources." Judge Griffin nodded, then turned to Wheeler. "Counselor," Wheeler rose ponderously, adjusting his spectacles. "Your Honor, while my colleague has presented an impressive array of paperwork, he conveniently ignores certain realities of territorial development. Mr. Holloway has invested over $50,000 in mining infrastructure, employed dozens of local men, and contributed substantially to this region's growth." Clara listened with growing indignation as Wheeler painted Holloway as a visionary businessman being persecuted by Eastern interests and federal overreach. The narrative was skillfully crafted to appeal to frontier resentment of Washington interference. Furthermore, Wheeler continued, "Miss Beaumont has neither the experience nor the resources to properly develop these mineral assets. Mr. Holloway's offer of $1,000 represents extraordinary generosity for unworked land that would otherwise lie fallow." Freeman rose to object, but Wheeler pressed on. "Most importantly, Your Honor, there is the matter of the claim's legitimacy. I call Mr. Samuel Holloway to testify." Holloway took the stand with practiced dignity, swearing on the Bible with solemn gravity. Under Wheeler's gentle questioning, he spun a tale of friendship with Albert Beaumont, culminating in a deathbed agreement to purchase the struggling mine. Albert knew I could develop Blue Ridge properly. Holloway testified, his voice carrying just the right note of regretful sincerity. He worried his niece, a fine Boston lady with no mining experience, would be taken advantage of out here. The sale was his final act of protection for her. Clara gripped the edge of the table, fury building in her chest. Freeman patted her arm in warning, then rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Holloway, you claim this sale occurred at Mr. Beaumont's deathbed. Were there any witnesses besides yourself?" "My foreman, James Harker, was present." "The same James Harker who signed as witness on the deed?" "Yes." "And where is Mr. Harker today?" Holloway's expression remained neutral. "Unfortunately, he was called away on business to California." "How convenient," Freeman remarked. "Mr. Holloway, are you aware that Albert Beaumont wrote to his niece just 3 days before his death, explicitly confirming her inheritance of Blue Ridge?" "I can't speak to what Albert might have written earlier. People often change their minds when facing mortality." Freeman produced the letter from his portfolio. "Your Honor, this letter was posted from Copper Canyon 2 days before Albert Beaumont's death. It clearly states his intention that Miss Beaumont inherit the property." Judge Griffin examined the letter, then looked at Holloway with narrowed eyes. "This directly contradicts your testimony, sir." "Anyone can write a letter," Holloway replied smoothly. "The deed bears his legal signature." "A signature that Mr. Weber has testified does not match Mr. Beaumont's known handwriting," Freeman countered. "Weber is not a handwriting expert," Wheeler interjected, "and a man's signature often changes when he's ill or injured." The legal battle continued through the morning, claims and counterclaims flying back and forth. Clara watched Judge Griffin carefully, trying to read his inscrutable expression. The old judge took copious notes, occasionally interrupting with precise questions that revealed his sharp legal mind. When court recessed for lunch, Freeman seemed cautiously optimistic. "Griffin is no fool," he told Clara and McGraw as they huddled in a corner of the town's small restaurant. "He knows Holloway's deed is suspicious, but there's more at play here than just law." "Politics," McGraw said grimly. Freeman nodded. "Holloway employs half the town directly or indirectly. His operation brings in revenue, freight, business, commerce. The territorial governor is his hunting companion." "So even with federal backing we could lose?" Clara asked. "Not lose exactly," Freeman clarified. "But Griffin might rule narrowly, perhaps confirm your ownership while granting Holloway mining rights based on his investment and development. It would be a Pyrrhic victory." "There must be something else we can do," Clara insisted. McGraw had been quiet, his weathered face thoughtful. Now he leaned forward. "What about Albert's murder?" Freeman frowned. "We have suspicions, but no proof. And Judge Griffin won't allow speculation in his courtroom." "What about the Mexican Miners' Journal? Vasquez. Hearsay from a dead man. Inadmissible, without corroboration." Clara thought of the Apache burial grounds, the pure water source that Holloway would destroy. What about bringing in Red Hawk to testify about Holloway's attempt to instigate an attack? Freeman shook his head. Griffin might allow it, but it could backfire. Many jurors would distrust Apache testimony on principle, and it would shift focus from property rights to Indian relations, dangerous ground. They fell silent as the waitress brought their food. Clara picked at her plate, appetite gone as she wrestled with the complexity of frontier justice. Back east, with her father's connections and clear documentation, this case would have been straightforward. Here, where law was still being shaped by necessity and compromise, victory seemed increasingly uncertain. As they prepared to return to the courthouse, the restaurant door swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. A young man, barely more than a boy, stood in the doorway, hat in hand, face flushed with exertion. "Mr. McGraw," he called, scanning the room until he spotted their table. "Mr. McGraw, sir." McGraw rose, recognizing one of his younger ranch hands. "Bobby, what is it?" The boy hurried over, speaking in a rushed whisper. "Riders hit the ranch, sir. 6 men. They ran off half the cattle and set fire to the north pasture. Rosalinda sent me to find you." McGraw's face hardened. "Anyone hurt?" "Miguel took a bullet in the shoulder. The others are all right." Clara saw the conflicting emotions cross McGraw's face, concern for his people and property, warring with his promise to stand by her in court. "Go," she said quietly. "Your ranch needs you." McGraw hesitated. "Holloway's trying to divide us. That's why he struck now during court." "I have Freeman," Clara assured him. "And Sheriff Dillard has deputies here. We'll be safe enough." Still, McGraw hesitated until Freeman added, "She's right, Ethan. This is a legal battle now, not one for rifles. Go see to your people." Finally, McGraw nodded. "I'll send some hands back to town. They'll watch the courthouse from across the street." He fixed Freeman with a hard stare. "Don't let her out of your sight." "You have my word." After McGraw departed with the young ranch hand, Clara and Freeman returned to the courthouse. The afternoon session began with Wheeler calling several character witnesses, local businessmen who testified to Holloway's contributions to the community, and by implication suggested that an Eastern woman had no business controlling valuable mining interests. Clara endured these thinly veiled insults with outward composure, though her anger simmered beneath the surface. She noticed, however, that Judge Griffin seemed increasingly impatient with this line of testimony, cutting off the third such witness with a sharp, "The court understands Mr. Holloway's civic standing. Unless you have testimony directly relevant to the property dispute, move on." Wheeler shifted tactics, calling a mining engineer who testified that Blue Ridge required immediate development to prevent tunnel collapse and water damage work that would cost thousands of dollars that Miss Beaumont presumably couldn't provide. Freeman countered by presenting Clara's own credentials, her education at Radcliffe, where she had studied geology and business management, and her experience helping manage her father's shipping interests in Boston. "Miss Beaumont is not some helpless female incapable of understanding mining operations," Freeman argued. "She is a modern, educated woman fully capable of directing Blue Ridge's development with or without Mr. Holloway's assistance." As the afternoon wore on, Clara became aware of a subtle shift in the courtroom atmosphere. Several townspeople who had entered seeming sympathetic to Holloway now watched her with thoughtful consideration. Judge Griffin's questions to Wheeler grew increasingly pointed, challenging his assertions about territorial versus federal jurisdiction. Finally, after both attorneys had presented closing arguments, Griffin announced he would render his verdict the following morning. Court adjourned into a buzz of speculation, the crowd filtering out onto Main Street, where they broke into animated discussion groups. "A delay is good for us," Freeman told Clara as they gathered their documents. "It gives Griffin time to consider the federal implications carefully. If he'd been planning to rule for Holloway, he would have done it immediately." Clara nodded, suddenly exhausted from the tension of the day. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house. It's small but clean, and the sheriff's office is just across the street." They left the courthouse together, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. The street was busy with the usual end-of-day commerce miners, coming-off-shift shopkeepers, sweeping boardwalks, freight wagons making final deliveries. Normal activity that somehow heightened Clara's sense of unreality, as if she were watching a theater backdrop, while her own drama played out in the foreground. "Miss Beaumont," the voice came from behind them. Clara turned to find Sheriff Dillard approaching, hat in hand. "I've assigned Deputy Fletcher to watch Mrs. Pendleton's tonight," he said. "Any trouble, you just bang on the wall. He'll be in the next room." "Thank you, Sheriff," Clara replied, still uncertain of Dillard's true allegiances. "Have you heard anything about Mr. McGraw's ranch? Fires contained. No structures lost from what my deputy reported." Dillard's expression was carefully neutral. "Convenient timing for Holloway, wouldn't you say, getting McGraw out of town during the trial." "You believe Holloway was behind it?" Freeman asked. Dillard replaced his hat. "Didn't say that, Counselor. Just noting the timing." He touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, folks. Fletcher will be watching." As Dillard walked away, Clara whispered, "Can we trust him?" "Partially," Freeman replied. "Dillard sees which way the wind is blowing. With federal authorities taking interest, he's hedging his bets. But remember, he worked with Holloway for years. Those ties don't break easily." Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house was a two-story clapboard structure with lace curtains and potted geraniums that seemed almost defiantly genteel amid the frontier rawness. The widow herself was a plump, energetic woman who greeted Clara like a long-lost niece, clucking over her ordeal and promising hot water for a proper bath. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear," Mrs. Pendleton assured her. "No one bothers my boarders. I keep a greener behind the counter, and I know how to use it." The room was small but immaculate, with a narrow bed washstand and small writing desk beneath a window overlooking the street. Clara washed away the courthouse dust as best she could, then sat at the desk to review her uncle's journals while waiting for dinner. Albert's meticulous notes chronicled his discovery of the gold vein, first suspecting its presence from trace elements, then confirming it through careful exploration. He had deliberately maintained the appearance of a marginally profitable copper operation while secretly mapping the far more valuable gold deposits. May 15, 1876. The primary vein extends beneath the eastern boundary, just as I suspected. My God, what wealth lies there! But to extract it properly would require cooperation with Holloway, and that man would sooner steal than partner. I must proceed carefully. The final entries grew increasingly concerned. June 2, 1876. Caught one of Holloway's men nosing around the main shaft today. Claimed he was looking for work, but his questions were too specific. Someone has talked. I must accelerate my plans to bring Clara west. June 8, 1876. Strange accidents in the mine this week. Support beam mysteriously weakened, nearly collapsed on Rodriguez. Found tampered equipment twice. Holloway grows bolder. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his death, sent a chill down Clara's spine. June 12, 1876. Have hidden the true assay reports and maps where H's men won't find them. If anything happens to me, Clara will need them to understand what she's fighting for. I've sent the key. Pray it reaches her safely, and that she forgives me for the danger I've placed in her path. Clara closed the journal, her throat tight with emotion. Her uncle had known he was in danger, but had continued fighting for what was rightfully his, what was now rightfully hers. She wouldn't dishonor his memory by surrendering now. A knock at the door startled her from these thoughts. "Miss Beaumont, dinner's ready," called Mrs. Pendleton's cheerful voice. Clara opened the door to find not only the boarding-house owner, but also Freeman, looking troubled. "What's happened?" Clara asked immediately. Freeman glanced toward the stairs. "Perhaps we should discuss it over dinner." Mrs. Pendleton's dining room accommodated 10, but tonight only 4 places were set for Clara Freeman. Deputy Fletcher and a traveling salesman who ate quickly before excusing himself to catch up on correspondence. Once they were relatively alone, Freeman leaned forward, voice low. "I've just received word from a contact in the telegraph office. Judge Griffin received a wire from the territorial governor this afternoon. About our case, Clara asked. Almost certainly. My contact couldn't read the contents, but the governor's office rarely intervenes in local matters unless significant interests are at stake. Deputy Fletcher, a lanky young man who had been silently attending to his beef stew, spoke up unexpectedly. Governor's in Holloway's pocket. Everybody knows it. Freeman nodded grimly. The timing is suspicious. I fear Holloway may have called in political favors to pressure Griffin. Can the governor overrule federal recognition of my claim? Clara asked. Not legally, no, but territorial judges serve at the governor's pleasure. Griffin's position could be at risk if he rules against powerful mining interests. Clara set down her fork, appetite gone. So after everything, the evidence, the federal confirmation, the forged documents, Holloway might still win through political manipulation. Welcome to the Arizona Territory, Miss Beaumont, Fletcher said with a wry smile, where justice often depends on who you know and how deep your pockets are. There must be something we can do, Clara insisted. Freeman considered. Griffin is fundamentally an honest judge despite the political pressures. If we could provide incontrovertible evidence of Holloway's crimes, not just the forgery, but Albert's murder, it might give him the backbone to withstand the governor's influence. The Apache testimony, still problematic, Freeman interrupted. We need white witnesses, respectable ones, whose word can't be dismissed. Clara's mind raced, recalling details from her uncle's journals. What about the miners who worked for my uncle? There was a Rodriguez mentioned, and others. They must have seen something. Most scattered after Albert's death. Holloway hired some others, moved on to new strikes. Freeman paused. But you're right. If we could locate even one who witnessed suspicious activity and was willing to testify. Sheriff Dillard might know where to find them, Deputy Fletcher suggested. Freeman looked skeptical. Dillard's playing both sides. I wouldn't trust him with this. Then who? Clara asked. Who else would know the miners in this region? Fletcher wiped his mouth, considering. There's old Pete at the assay office. Nothing happens in the mining community without Pete knowing. Came here in the '49 rush, knows every prospector and hard rock man from here to California. Could you take us to him? Clara asked. Tonight, Fletcher glanced at Freeman, who nodded slowly. It's worth trying, but we should wait until full dark. Less chance of Holloway's men seeing us. They finished dinner in tense silence, then returned to Clara's room to wait for nightfall. Through the window, she watched the street gradually empty as saloon lights brightened and shops closed. Copper Canyon transformed from a bustling commercial hub to a more dangerous nocturnal incarnation, where hard men drank away the day's earnings and disputes were settled with fists, or worse. As the church bell struck 9, Fletcher knocked softly. Time to go, Miss Beaumont. Stay close and keep quiet. They slipped out the back door of the boarding house, Freeman leading Clara, while Fletcher followed, hand resting on his holstered revolver. Instead of taking the main street, they wound through narrow alleys between buildings, avoiding the pools of light spilling from saloon windows. The assay office stood at the edge of town, a squat stone building with a tall brick chimney, dark, except for a single window glowing amber against the night. Pete practically lives here, Fletcher explained as they approached. Runs tests at night when he won't be disturbed. He knocked a specific pattern on the back door. After a moment, it cracked open, revealing a wizened face half hidden by an enormous white beard. Fletcher! What in tarnation? The old man's rheumy eyes widened as he spotted Clara and Freeman. This ain't social hour, boy. I'm working. Need your help, Pete, about Albert Beaumont's miners. It's important. The old man hesitated, then grudgingly swung the door wider. 5 minutes, that's all you get. As they stepped into the warm, chemical-scented interior of the assay office, None of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street, a lean man with a star on his vest who turned immediately and headed toward the Golden Palace Saloon, where Samuel Holloway held court most evenings. Sheriff Tom Dillard had made his choice. McGraw rode through the charred remains of his north pasture, the acrid smell of burned grass still hanging in the air despite the morning drizzle. Blackened fence posts stood like skeletal sentinels across the landscape. The cattle that hadn't been scattered were huddled in the far corner, still spooked from yesterday's attack. His face was etched with exhaustion. After returning to the ranch, he'd spent the night organizing his hands to round up scattered stock, treat the injured, and shore up defenses. Miguel's shoulder wound had been cleaned and bandaged, but the bullet remained lodged deep in muscle. The young foreman needed a doctor, but leaving the ranch undefended again wasn't an option. "How many head missing?" McGraw asked Jacob, who rode beside him. 30, maybe 40, the ranch hand replied grimly. "Hard to get an accurate count with the herd this scattered." McGraw nodded, calculating the loss. 40 head represented nearly a quarter of his small herd, not devastating but significant for a ranch operating on thin margins. The timing wasn't coincidental. Holloway knew exactly where to hit him hardest. "Riders coming," called Roberto from his lookout position on the ridge. McGraw's hand moved instinctively to his holster. "How many?" "Just 2. One of them's Bobby." McGraw relaxed slightly. He'd sent young Bobby into town at dawn to check on Clara and bring back news of the trial. The second rider must be a message from Freeman. The riders appeared over the rise, minutes later, Bobby leading, followed by a man McGraw didn't immediately recognize. As they drew closer, Bobby waved urgently, his young face tight with concern. "Mr. McGraw got news from town." McGraw rode to meet them, studying the second rider, a lean, weathered man in his 50s with a prospector's beard and calloused hands. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar. "What's happened?" McGraw demanded as they reined in. "Judge Griffin's been found dead," Bobby blurted. "Shot in his chambers early this morning." McGraw felt as though he'd been struck. "Dead? What about Miss Beaumont Freeman?" "Safe for now. They're at the boarding house with a deputy guarding them." Bobby gestured to his companion. "This is Mr. Rodriguez. He worked Albert Beaumont's mine. Miss Clara sent him to find you." The miner nodded respectfully. "Senor McGraw, the senorita says to tell you that Sheriff Dillard has called for a federal marshal, but it will be 3 days before he arrives from Tucson." His accent was thick, but understandable. "She says Holloway's men are watching the boarding house. They cannot leave town." McGraw processed this information, his mind racing through implications. "Griffin murdered. Convenient timing for Holloway." "Town's in an uproar," Bobby added. "Some folks are saying it was Apaches. Others blame drifters. But Miss Clara found something." "Not here," Rodriguez interrupted, glancing around nervously. "The walls have ears, even in the desert." McGraw studied the miner more carefully. "You're the Rodriguez mentioned in Albert's journal, the one who nearly died when a support beam was tampered with." Rodriguez nodded unconsciously, touching a scar that ran along his hairline. "I saw things at Blue Ridge, things that got Albert Beaumont killed. I have been hiding since working small claims in the mountains." His dark eyes held McGraw's. "But the senorita convinced me it is time to speak truth no matter the danger." McGraw made a decision. "Bobby, ride to the Hendersons' place. Ask Doc Wilson to come for Miguel. Then find Freeman and tell him we'll be at the East Trail crossing by sundown." He turned to Rodriguez. "You'll be safer at the ranch than in town. Holloway has too many eyes there." As they rode back toward the ranch house, Rodriguez spoke quietly. "Your cattle, your pasture, this is Holloway's warning. He will destroy everything you have piece by piece." "He can try." McGraw replied grimly. "You do not understand, senor. Holloway is not just a rich man. He is—" Rodriguez struggled for the word. "Un monstruo, a monster. I have seen what he does to those who oppose him." "So have I," McGraw said. "During the war, Holloway commanded a Confederate irregular unit in the Missouri border country. They weren't soldiers. They were butchers." Rodriguez looked surprised. "You knew him then?" "I knew of him. My regiment was sent to stop his raids on civilian settlements." McGraw's face hardened with the memory. "We were too late for one town, Lawrence Creek. He'd made an example of them for supporting the Union. 36 civilians executed, including women and children. And now he is a respected businessman," Rodriguez said bitterly. "War has a way of burying certain truths," McGraw replied. "Victors become heroes, defeated become victims, and men like Holloway, they just change uniforms and continue their predation elsewhere." They rode in silence for a moment before Rodriguez spoke again. "The señorita, she has her uncle's courage. Last night we found 2 more miners from Blue Ridge willing to testify about the accidents before Albert died. With my testimony and the journal, it would have been enough for Judge Griffin." He crossed himself. "Now Griffin is dead, and those men have disappeared. And the territorial governor is Holloway's hunting companion," McGraw added grimly. "Even with federal recognition of Clara's claim, Holloway's making sure there's no one left to enforce it." They crested the final ridge before the ranch, the main house coming into view below. McGraw reined in sharply. "Something's wrong." The front door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. No smoke rose from the chimney despite the morning chill. No movement around the corrals or bunkhouse. "Ambush," Rodriguez whispered. McGraw shook his head. "They'd have sprung it by now." He drew his rifle from its scabbard nonetheless. "Stay behind me. If there's trouble, ride hard for town." They approached cautiously, McGraw scanning for signs of danger. The ranch yard was eerily silent, except for a lone chicken scratching near the water trough. He dismounted at the hitching post, motioning for Rodriguez to remain mounted. "Rosalinda," McGraw called, approaching the open door. "Miguel." No answer. McGraw entered the house, rifle ready. The main room was undisturbed, chairs in place, breakfast dishes still on the table, fire banked in the hearth. Nothing seemed missing or damaged. "Hello," he called again, moving toward the bedrooms. Still no response. A quick search confirmed the house was empty. McGraw returned to the yard, unease growing in his gut. "Check the bunkhouse," he instructed Rodriguez, who had finally dismounted. The bunkhouse, too, was deserted, beds made as if the men had risen normally for the day's work. Their personal effects remained tobacco pouches, playing cards, spare clothing, ruling out a planned departure. "The barn," McGraw said, growing increasingly concerned. As they approached the large structure, McGraw noticed fresh hoofprints in the muddy ground, many horses coming and going within the last few hours. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the usual smells of hay and horses were tainted with something metallic and familiar blood. Miguel lay on a pile of straw eyes, closed his bandaged shoulder, now soaked crimson. Beside him, Rosalinda knelt in prayer, her gray head bowed. In the stalls beyond, McGraw's remaining ranch hands sat or lay in various states of injury, guarded by 2 of Holloway's men with shotguns. "Mr. McGraw," one of the gunmen drawled. "'Bout time you showed up." McGraw raised his rifle, but the second gunman immediately pressed his shotgun barrel against Rosalinda's gray head. Old man, drop it or the Mexican granny gets ventilated." For a tense moment, McGraw calculated options, finding none that didn't end with his people dead. Smart choice, the first gunman said as McGraw reluctantly lowered his weapon. Now kick it over here. McGraw complied, his mind racing for alternatives. What do you want? Just delivering a message from Mr. Holloway. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Said to tell you this is your last warning. Abandon the Beaumont woman and her claim, or next time we won't be so gentle with your people. You call this gentle? McGraw growled, nodding toward Miguel's bleeding form. He resisted. Most of 'em had more sense. The gunman gestured with his shotgun. Mr. Holloway's a reasonable businessman. All he wants is what's rightfully his. Tell the woman to sign over Blue Ridge, and all this unpleasantness stops. And if she doesn't, the gunman shrugged, then I reckon we'll be back. Only next time we won't leave witnesses. He jerked his head toward the door. Rodriguez, get in here, where I can see you. When Rodriguez didn't appear, the gunman's face darkened. Where's the greaser? A sharp crack split the air, and the gunman at Rosalinda's side crumpled, blood blooming across his chest. The first gunman whirled, raising his shotgun toward the door, but McGraw was already moving. He drove his shoulder into the man's midsection, the shotgun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as they crashed to the ground. The struggle was brief and brutal. Though decades older, McGraw fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting his own. His fist connected with the gunman's jaw, twice, until the younger man went limp beneath him. McGraw rose unsteadily, wiping blood from his split knuckles. Rodriguez stood in the doorway, rifle still trained on the fallen men. Gracias, McGraw said simply. Rodriguez nodded. De nada. My father taught me when a good man fights evil, you do not stand aside. McGraw moved quickly to Miguel's side. The young foreman's pulse was weak but steady. He needs that doctor soon, McGraw told Rosalinda, who was already tearing fresh bandages from her apron. The bleeding started again when they made him move. She explained, her weathered hands working efficiently despite their trembling. These animals would not let me help him. McGraw checked his other hands. 2 had minor injuries, cuts and bruises from putting up a fight. The others were shaken, but unharmed. They came at dawn, Jacob explained, nursing a swollen jaw. 15, maybe 20 men. Said they just wanted to talk, then pulled guns when we were surrounded. Their leaders said they'd be back tomorrow, added another hand. Said next time they'd burn everything to the ground if you didn't back down. McGraw's expression hardened. Get everyone fit to ride ready. We're evacuating the ranch. Leaving, Rosalinda looked up in shock. But this is your home, Ethan. And I intend to keep it, McGraw assured her. But we can't defend it, not against 20 men. They've already shown they'll use you to get to me. He helped her to her feet. Pack only what you need. We'll move everyone to the line shack in Chapel Canyon. It's defensible, and Holloway's men won't know to look there. What about Miguel? Jacob asked. He can't ride. Make a travois. We'll pull him behind the wagon. McGraw turned to Rodriguez. Can you ride to town? Tell Freeman what's happened, and that I'm bringing everyone to the East Trail, crossing at sundown. Rodriguez nodded. What about these 2? He gestured to the fallen gunman. McGraw checked them briefly. This one's dead. The other's just knocked out. He considered for a moment, then made a decision. Tie him up and put him in the root cellar. We'll send the sheriff for him once we're clear. As his people hurried to prepare, McGraw stood in the ranch yard, surveying the home he'd built over 15 years. The modest house, the well-tended corrals, the fields he'd irrigated through back-breaking labor, all of it now threatened because he'd chosen to stand against a powerful man's greed. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was Clara Beaumont's inheritance worth all this, Worth risking the lives of people who depended on him? Then he remembered Albert's journal entries, the pure water source sacred to the Apache. The miners crushed by accidents when they got too close to Holloway's secrets. The judge murdered for daring to consider justice over politics. Some fights couldn't be walked away from, no matter the cost. By mid-afternoon, the evacuation was complete. The wounded had been loaded into wagons along with essential supplies. Livestock had been driven to a hidden valley that could sustain them for weeks if necessary. McGraw took a final walk through the empty ranch house, memorizing each detail in case he never saw it again. In the bedroom, he paused before the daguerreotype of Sarah and little Beth. After a moment's hesitation, he removed it from the wall and carefully wrapped it in a handkerchief, tucking it inside his shirt pocket. Some treasures couldn't be replaced. As he mounted up to lead the small caravan toward Chapel Canyon, Jacob rode alongside. "What about Miss Beaumont?" the young hand asked. "If we're hiding out, who's going to help her?" "I am," McGraw replied simply. "Once you're all settled, I'm heading back to town." Alone against Holloway and all his men. Jacob shook his head. "That's suicide, boss." "Maybe." McGraw adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "But I made a promise. To Miss Beaumont. To myself." McGraw's weathered face revealed little, but his voice carried the weight of conviction. "That I wouldn't stand by while the strong prey on the weak. Not again." Jacob studied his employer with new understanding. "This ain't just about the mine anymore, is it?" "It never was," McGraw admitted. "Not for Holloway, not for Albert Beaumont, and not for me." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking behind them. Finally, Jacob spoke again. "I'm coming with you." McGraw shook his head. "You're needed here. These people depend on you if something happens to me." "With respect, Mr. McGraw, I can make my own decisions about where I'm needed." The young man straightened in his saddle. "My pa rode with you during the war, 27th Pennsylvania. He told me stories about Lawrence Creek, about what happened after. Said you carried 8 children to safety through Confederate lines." McGraw's expression tightened. He hadn't spoken of Lawrence Creek in years, had tried to bury those memories beneath the daily labor of ranch life. "Your father was James Whitfield," he said quietly. "Good man, steady under fire." Jacob nodded. "He said the same about you. Said there wasn't a braver officer in the Union Army. Said you resigned your commission after Lawrence Creek because the generals wouldn't pursue Holloway's unit into Tennessee. Ancient history now, not to you." Jacob's young face was earnest. "And not to me. Pa said we owe you a debt that can't be repaid. So I'm coming with you, sir. To town. To face Holloway." McGraw studied the young man, barely 20, with his father's determined chin and clear eyes. "Your pa would skin me alive if I got you killed." "My pa would understand that some things are worth dying for." Jacob met his gaze steadily. "He died fighting against men like Holloway. I can do no less." After a long moment, McGraw nodded once. "Be ready to ride at sunset." The East Trail crossing lay in a shallow valley where an old mining road intersected the main route to Copper Canyon. McGraw and Jacob arrived just as the sun dipped below the western mountains, painting the landscape in deepening shades of purple and gold. They dismounted in a grove of cottonwoods to wait, listening to the gurgle of the creek and the evening calls of mourning doves. "No sign of them yet," Jacob observed, scanning the trail toward town. "They'll come," McGraw replied, though a flicker of concern crossed his features. Rodriguez should have reached town hours ago. Freeman should have had plenty of time to arrange transportation for Clara. Unless something had gone wrong. Another hour passed, darkness settling over the valley. McGraw built no fire, not wanting to signal their position to any of Holloway's scouts who might be watching the trails. The night grew cold, their breath forming small clouds in the moonlight. "Maybe they took another route," Jacob suggested, stamping his feet to ward off the chill. McGraw shook his head. "Freeman knows this is the safest meeting point. If they're not here—" He didn't finish the thought. The sound of approaching horses reached them first, not from the direction of town, but from the north trail. McGraw and Jacob melted into the shadows, rifles ready. 3 riders emerged into the moonlight. McGraw recognized Rodriguez immediately, accompanied by Deputy Fletcher and a third man he didn't know. "Where's Freeman?" McGraw called, stepping from concealment. "Where's Miss Beaumont?" Rodriguez dismounted quickly, his expression grave. "Holloway's men have them. They're being held at the Golden Palace." McGraw felt ice form in his veins. "What happened?" "Dillard betrayed us." Fletcher explained, his young face tight with anger. "He was watching when we met with Pete at the assay office. Must have gone straight to Holloway." "We were ambushed returning to the boarding house," Rodriguez continued. 4 men with shotguns. They took Senorita Clara and Senor Freeman. Said they would be guests of Mr. Holloway until the property matter was resolved. "And Dillard?" McGraw demanded. "What's the sheriff doing about this kidnapping?" Fletcher spat disgustedly. "Claims his hands are tied. Says there's no kidnapping, just a business negotiation between Holloway and Miss Beaumont. Says he can't interfere in private matters without evidence of a crime. Judge Griffin's murder isn't evidence enough. No witnesses, no case," Fletcher replied bitterly. "Town's terrified. Nobody's talking, not after what happened to Griffin." He gestured to the third rider. "That's why I brought Pete here. He's the only one still willing to stand against Holloway." The old assayer dismounted stiffly, his white beard ghostly in the moonlight. "Ethan McGraw. Been a while." McGraw nodded in recognition. "Pete, heard you might have information about Albert Beaumont's death." "More than information. Got evidence." Pete patted his saddlebag. "Soil and ore samples from the accident site. Mercury and cyanide levels that could only come from deliberate contamination. Got Albert's original assay reports, too, showing exactly where that gold vein runs. Enough to prove Holloway murdered Albert." Pete's rheumy eyes hardened. "Enough to hang him 10 times over if we had an honest court. But with Griffin dead and the territorial courts in Holloway's pocket, the federal marshal," McGraw remembered. "Dillard sent for him." Fletcher shook his head. "Telegram was never sent. I checked at the Western Union office. Dillard lied about that, too." McGraw absorbed this news, the full weight of their situation becoming clear. No law to appeal to. No justice within reach. Clara and Freeman prisoners of a man who had already murdered to get what he wanted. "So what now, Mr. McGraw?" Jacob asked quietly. McGraw looked at the 4 men gathered around him, a young ranch hand, a disillusioned deputy, an aging assayer, and a Mexican miner. Hardly the force one would choose to go against a small army of hired guns. Yet they were all that stood between Clara Beaumont and a man who had massacred an entire town during the war. A man who would think nothing of eliminating one more obstacle to his ambitions. "Now," McGraw said, checking his rifle with grim determination, "we go get her back." The Golden Palace Saloon dominated Copper Canyon's main street, a 2-story structure with elaborate Victorian gingerbread trim and genuine glass windows imported at great expense from San Francisco. A far cry from the rough mining camp saloons that dotted the territory, It stood as a monument to Samuel Holloway's wealth and ambition. Tonight, gold-tinted lamplight spilled from its windows onto the muddy street, piano music and raucous laughter drifting into the night. Business continued as usual despite the judge's murder that morning. Or perhaps because of it, men seeking to drown uncomfortable truths in whiskey and faro. From the shadows across the street, McGraw studied the building, noting the armed men positioned at each entrance. 2 more patrolled the balcony that wrapped around the second floor, where Holloway kept private rooms for special guests. Somewhere inside, Clara and Freeman were being held. "I count 12 men visible," Deputy Fletcher whispered from beside him. "Probably more inside." McGraw nodded grimly. "Holloway's taking no chances." They had left Pete and Rodriguez with the horses at the edge of town, ready for a quick escape if needed. Only McGraw, Fletcher, and Jacob had come to scout the saloon, moving through back alleys to avoid Holloway's lookouts. "What's the plan?" Jacob asked, his young face tense but determined in the dim light. McCure continued studying the building, his weathered features revealing nothing of his thoughts. "We can't fight our way in. Too many guns, too many innocent bystanders." "Could we draw them out somehow?" Fletcher suggested. "Create a diversion." Holloway wouldn't leave the saloon. He'd send his men to deal with it. McGraw's eyes narrowed as he spotted a familiar figure entering through the main doors. "Well, well, look who's come to pay his respects." Sheriff Dillard, unmistakable in his long coat and broad-brimmed hat, disappeared into the saloon's bright interior. "That two-faced son of a—" Fletcher began. "Might be useful," McGraw interrupted. "Dillard's a weather vane, always pointing whichever way the wind blows strongest. Right now, that's Holloway. But if the wind's shifted," Fletcher looked skeptical. "You think we can turn him?" "Not willingly, but Dillard's got one constant in his life: self-preservation." McGraw's expression hardened. "Let's give him something to worry about." They retreated to the livery stable where Pete and Rodriguez waited with the horses. McGraw quickly outlined his plan, audacious, desperate, and their only chance against overwhelming odds. "It's suicide," Pete said bluntly when McGraw finished. "Probably," McGraw agreed. "Got a better idea?" The old assayer stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Matter of fact, I might. You'll still need to get inside, but I can give you an edge." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Been saving this for a special occasion." "What is it?" Jacob asked as Pete carefully opened the pouch to reveal a fine black powder. "Miner's friend. And enemy." Pete's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "Blasting powder, but finer than any you've seen. I've been experimenting with it for years. More powerful than dynamite, stable until you wanted not to be." McGraw raised an eyebrow. "How much damage could that do?" "Small pinch blow a mining charge. This whole pouch." Pete whistled softly. "Take down half that saloon." "We can't risk civilians," Fletcher objected. "Won't have to." Pete explained his modification to McGraw's plan, the others listening intently. When he finished, McGraw nodded slowly. "It might work. Jacob, you and Rodriguez go back to the East Trail crossing. If we're not there by dawn, ride for Tucson. Find Marshal Hargrove. He served with me in the 27th. Tell him everything." "I'm staying," Jacob insisted. "You'll need every gun. This isn't open for discussion." McGraw's tone brooked no argument. "If we fail, someone needs to make sure the truth gets out. That Clara's claim is validated. That Holloway answers for his crimes." Reluctantly, Jacob nodded. "Yes, sir." "Fletcher," McGraw continued, "you'll approach from the kitchen entrance. Pete, you take position on the roof of the assay office, best view of the balcony from there. "And you?" Rodriguez asked. McGraw checked his Colt one final time. "I'm walking in the front door." The Golden Palace's interior matched its grand facade, mahogany bar stretching the length of one wall, crystal chandeliers hanging from stamped tin ceilings, plush carpets imported from Europe. At the far end, a small orchestra played, while elegantly dressed women circulated among the patrons, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Samuel Holloway held court at his usual table on the raised platform beneath an enormous painting of a Greek goddess. Expensively tailored as always, he was surrounded by the town's merchants and officials, all eager to demonstrate their loyalty after Judge Griffin's unfortunate accident. Sheriff Dillard sat uncomfortably at Holloway's right hand, nursing a whiskey and glancing occasionally toward the stairs that led to the private rooms above. Whatever his regrets about betraying Clara Beaumont, they weren't visible on his florid face. The saloon's massive doors swung open, admitting a gust of cool night air and a solitary figure that seemed to bring silence in his wake. Conversations faltered. The piano player hit a wrong note. Every eye turned to the entrance. Ethan McGraw stood just inside the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the night beyond. He wore no gun belt. It would have been confiscated immediately, but carried a Winchester repeater pointed casually toward the floor. His face, shadowed beneath his hat brim, revealed nothing as he surveyed the room. Holloway's men reacted instantly, hands moving to weapons, but their employer raised a hand, stopping them as a smile spread across his face. "Ethan McGraw," Holloway called, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Come join us for a drink." He gestured magnanimously toward an empty chair at his table. McGraw didn't move. "Where is she, Holloway?" The smile didn't falter. "Miss Beaumont is my guest, resting comfortably while we negotiate the final details of our business arrangement." "Kidnapping is a federal offense," McGraw said evenly. "So is murdering a judge." A ripple went through the crowd. Holloway's smile tightened fractionally. "Serious accusations, McGraw, especially with no evidence or witnesses." His gaze hardened. "Judge Griffin's death was a tragedy, but frontier justice can be unpredictable. As for Miss Beaumont, she's here of her own free will. Isn't that right, Sheriff?" All eyes turned to Dillard, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. "No official complaint has been filed." "There. You see?" Holloway spread his hands. "Everything is perfectly legal. Now why don't you put down that rifle and join us? Whiskey might help you see reason." "I want to see Clara Beaumont," McGraw insisted. "Now." Something dangerous flashed in Holloway's eyes. "You're in no position to make demands, old man. I've been patient with you out of respect for your age and service, but even my patience has limits." McGraw took a single step forward. "Lawrence Creek." The two words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of confusion through the crowd. But their effect on Holloway was immediate. The confident smile vanished his face, paling slightly beneath its tan. "What did you say?" he asked, voice suddenly hoarse. "Lawrence Creek, Missouri, April 1863. McGraw's voice carried to every corner of the hushed saloon. 36 civilians massacred by Confederate irregulars under your command. Women, children." Holloway recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Ancient history, McGraw. A tragedy of war, nothing more." "Not war. Murder." McGraw took another step forward. "Those people were unarmed. They'd surrendered. You lined them up against the church wall and executed them. Women clutching babies. Children crying for mercy." The saloon had gone deathly quiet. Even Holloway's loyal supporters were exchanging uncomfortable glances. "I was cleared of all charges." Holloway snapped, his composure cracking. Military tribunal found insufficient evidence. Because you burned the bodies and the records. Because your men threatened witnesses. McGraw's voice remained steady, implacable. But I was there, Holloway. I saw what you did. I found the survivors you missed. Holloway surged to his feet, face mottled with rage. Enough, 15 years I've built my reputation in this territory. I won't have it smeared by ancient lies from a broken-down old soldier with a grudge. Not lies, came a new voice from the kitchen doorway. Deputy Fletcher emerged supporting an elderly man with a clerical collar. This is Reverend Thomas Whitaker, former chaplain of the 27th Pennsylvania. He was at Lawrence Creek, too. The Reverend straightened painfully his rheumy eyes, finding Holloway. I recognized you the moment I arrived in Copper Canyon last week. Older, respectable now, but the same man who ordered those executions. A murmur ran through the crowd. Holloway's face contorted with fury. This is absurd! Some senile preacher and a washed-up rancher spinning war stories. I wasn't the only survivor. The Reverend continued, his frail voice somehow cutting through Holloway's bluster. Ethan McGraw carried 8 children to safety that day. 8 witnesses to your butchery. McGraw nodded slowly. One of those children was Jacob Whitfield's daughter. He served under me later, hunting your unit across 3 states. His son works my ranch now. Holloway looked around wildly, seeing the change in the room, the doubt creeping into the faces of even his supporters. This is a conspiracy. These men are trying to steal valuable mining rights with these fabrications. Not fabrications, McGraw countered. Sworn testimony. Reverend Whitaker has provided a deposition to the War Department, as have the other survivors. The investigation has been reopened. This was a bluff. McGraw had no idea the Reverend was even in the territory until Fletcher had found him hiding at the church earlier that evening. But the panic in Holloway's eyes suggested it had struck home. "Sheriff," Holloway barked, "arrest these men for slander and disturbing the peace." Dillard hesitated, looking between Holloway and McGraw, clearly calculating which way the wind was now blowing. Furthermore, McGraw continued relentlessly, Pete Donnelly at the assay office has scientific proof that Albert Beaumont was murdered mercury and cyanide poisoning disguised as a mining accident, the same method used on 3 other claim owners who stood in your way. Another ripple through the crowd. Someone near the back stood and quietly exited. Then another. Holloway's control was visibly slipping. This is preposterous. Where's your proof? On its way to the federal marshal in Tucson, along with Albert's journals documenting your threats and testimony from his former employees about the accidents you arranged. McGraw's weathered face was implacable. It's over, Holloway. Lawrence Creek has finally caught up with you. For a moment, genuine fear flashed across Holloway's features. Then, with visible effort, he regained his composure, a cold smile spreading across his face. Very impressive performance, McGraw. Almost had me worried. He settled back into his chair, swirling his brandy. But you've made one critical miscalculation. McGraw raised an eyebrow, which is, you're unarmed, outnumbered, and Miss Beaumont remains my guest upstairs. Holloway gestured, and 4 of his men moved to surround McGraw. I think this conversation is over. McGraw didn't resist as they took his rifle. You're right about one thing, Holloway. This conversation is over. His eyes shifted to the ceiling. Now, a sharp crack split the air as a rifle shot from outside shattered one of the saloon's windows. Instinctively, everyone ducked exactly as McGraw had planned. In the moment of confusion, Fletcher drew his revolver, covering the room, while McGraw sprinted for the stairs. 2 of Holloway's men moved to intercept him, but Fletcher's warning shot froze them in place. "Nobody moves," the deputy shouted. "Next one won't miss." Holloway recovered first. "Shoot him, you idiots," he commanded his men. But the saloon had erupted into chaos. Patrons scrambled for the exits, overturning tables and chairs. In the confusion, McGraw reached the stairs and took them two at a time, dodging a wild shot from one of Holloway's men. On the second floor, a long hallway stretched before him, lined with doors. At the far end, a guard stood outside one room, drawing his pistol as McGraw appeared. McGraw dove forward as the guard fired the bullet, splintering the banister behind him. Rolling to his feet with surprising agility for his age, he charged before the man could fire again. The guard's second shot went wide as McGraw slammed into him, driving him back against the wall. It was a brief, brutal struggle. The guard was younger, stronger, but McGraw fought with the desperate determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. His fist connected with the guard's jaw once, twice. When the man slumped unconscious, McGraw retrieved his dropped revolver and turned to the door. "Clara," he called, trying the handle. "Locked." "Mr. McGraw." Her voice, muffled but unmistakable, came from within. McGraw stepped back and fired at the lock. The door splintered but held. A second shot shattered the mechanism entirely, and he shouldered it open. Clara stood in the center of a lavishly furnished room, her face pale but resolute. Behind her, Joshua Freeman sat bound to a chair, a bruise darkening one side of his face. "Are you hurt?" McGraw asked urgently. She shook her head. "They've treated us correctly, so far." McGraw quickly cut Freeman's bonds with his pocket knife. "Can you walk?" The lawyer stood unsteadily. "Yes, though I might not be much help in a fight." "There's no time for explanations," McGraw said, handing Freeman the guard's revolver. "We need to move, now." He led them to the hallway, where the sounds of continued chaos rose from below. Gunshots echoed, punctuated by breaking glass and shouting. "This way," McGraw directed, guiding them not toward the main stairs, but to a narrower service staircase at the far end of the hall. Fletcher's creating a diversion downstairs. Pete's watching the back door from across the street. They descended quickly, emerging into a small storage room filled with liquor crates and linens. Beyond, the kitchen stood empty, its staff having fled at the first sound of gunfire. McGraw peered cautiously through the rear door. The back alley appeared deserted. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at Clara and Freeman. Both nodded, faces tense but determined. "Stay close. If anything happens, run for the livery stable. Rodriguez is waiting with horses." They slipped into the alley, keeping to the shadows as they moved away from the Golden Palace. The sound of gunfire had diminished, but shouting continued from the main street. McGraw led them along the narrow passage between buildings, heading toward the edge of town. They had almost reached the cross street when a figure stepped from the shadows ahead, blocking their path. Samuel Holloway stood before them, coatless now, his expensive shirt stained with sweat or blood. In his hand gleamed a Remington revolver pointed directly at McGraw's chest. "Going somewhere." Holloway's cultured voice had acquired a dangerous edge, his composed facade crumbling. "I underestimated you, McGraw. Again, I won't make that mistake a third time." McGraw pushed Clara behind him. "It's over, Holloway. Let them go. Your quarrel's with me." A bitter laugh escaped Holloway's lips. "My quarrel is with anyone who stands between me and what's mine. The girl, the mine, this town, all mine." "The mine was never yours," Clara said, stepping beside McGraw despite his protective gesture. "You murdered my uncle to steal it." "Your uncle was a fool," Holloway spat. "He found a fortune and couldn't see its potential, just like these small-minded townspeople." His eyes burned with a fervor that bordered on madness. "I built something here. Took a worthless mining camp and made it prosperous. Everything I touch turns to gold." "Everything you touch turns to blood," McGraw countered. "Lawrence Creek, Albert Beaumont, Judge Griffin. How many more have to die for your ambitions?" Holloway's face contorted. "As many as necessary. I won't be judged by lesser men. Not then, not now." The revolver steadied. "Enough talk. Miss Beaumont, you will come with me now. We have papers to sign. McGraw, you and the lawyer can join Judge Griffin." "No." Clara's voice was surprisingly steady. "I won't sign anything. I'll never give you Blue Ridge." For a moment, genuine confusion crossed Holloway's face, as if he couldn't comprehend anyone refusing his demands. Then his expression hardened. "Then you're of no use to me either." The revolver shifted toward Clara. McGraw moved instinctively, lunging forward as Holloway's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot echoed in the narrow alley. McGraw staggered, a burning sensation spreading across his side, but his momentum carried him into Holloway, driving the larger man back against the wall. The revolver discharged again, the bullet burying itself in the dirt. Despite his wound, McGraw grappled for the weapon, his weathered hands surprisingly strong as they closed around Holloway's wrist. They struggled silently and tensely, two old enemies locked in a final confrontation 15 years in the making. Holloway was younger, heavier, but McGraw fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting something more precious than his own life. Slowly, inexorably, he forced the revolver upward away from Clara and Freeman. "You should have stayed dead at Lawrence Creek," Holloway hissed, his face inches from McGraw's. "You should have faced justice then," McGraw replied through gritted teeth. "Saved us all this trouble." The revolver, now pointed skyward, discharged a third time. In the same instant, McGraw drove his knee into Holloway's midsection. The mine owner doubled over his grip on the weapon, loosening just enough for McGraw to wrench it free. McGraw stumbled backward, pressing his left hand against the spreading blood stain on his shirt, while his right leveled the Remington at Holloway. Holloway straightened slowly, a strange smile spreading across his face, despite his defeat. "Well, finish it, McGraw. Isn't this what you've wanted since Lawrence Creek? Your chance for revenge." McGraw's hand remained steady, his weathered face revealing nothing of the pain radiating from his wound. "This isn't about revenge." "Then what justice?" Holloway laughed bitterly. "There's no justice in this world, old man. Only power. Those who have it, and those who don't." "You're wrong." McGraw's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Justice may come slowly, but it comes. For Lawrence Creek, for Albert Beaumont, for all of it." Clara stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on McGraw's arm. "He's not worth it, Ethan. Not like this." For a long moment, McGraw remained motionless, the revolver unwavering. Then slowly he lowered the weapon. "You're right," he told Clara. "He'll face a proper trial. Answer for everything." Holloway's expression shifted from defiance to disbelief, then to calculating assessment. His eyes flicked to something behind them. "I don't think so," he said softly. Before McGraw could react, running footsteps sounded from behind. He turned to see Sheriff Dillard approaching, revolver drawn. "Drop it, McGraw," Dillard commanded. McGraw hesitated, caught between threats. In that moment of distraction, Holloway moved with surprising speed for a man his size. He charged forward, driving his shoulder into McGraw's wounded side. Pain exploded through McGraw's body. The revolver slipped from his grasp as he fell to one knee. Holloway scooped up the weapon, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, as he pointed it at McGraw's head. Always the hero, eh, McGraw? That's your weakness. Always was. McGraw looked up, meeting Holloway's gaze, without fear. Do it then. But it won't change anything. The truth about you is already spreading. You've lost. I never lose. Holloway snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the narrow alley. To be continued.